My name's Angela. I'm an alcoholic. You guys are in for a treat today. It was an honor and privilege to be asked to introduce my sponsor. I was asked this like 30 seconds ago, so it's always a good thing because then I can't spin out about it. Nicole's been sponsoring me for the better part of a decade now. When she had 10 years sober, I went to her 10-year sobriety anniversary party. And after that, I told Rosie, I said, I think I'm going to ask Nicole to sponsor me. And Rosie's like, run, don't walk with that. And I did. And I'm super grateful that I did. She held my leg while I gave birth to my son. We've been involved in each other's lives. She's like a sister to me that I look up to. She has the better part of a quarter century sober now. She's a professional, powerful woman in this community. That's what I wanted. And I got that because I followed what she does. And she, aside from all of her external success, it's mostly her spiritual program that I admire so much. She's been the most consistent woman I've ever seen as far as the mother she is, the sponsor she is to other women, and um I want what she has, so I do what she does. And I've gotten all the gifts of sobriety because I've followed in her footsteps. And so it's just such a privilege to introduce Nicole. Come on up here.
Good morning. I'm Nicole and I'm an alcoholic. That's a lot to live up to. Um, Thank you for introducing me and thank you for asking me to speak at your meeting. And hello to everyone on Zoom. I think I know a couple people on there. So, it is always a pleasure to speak at a meeting of AA. And my home group is the Solution Group, which is also a speaker meeting. And our attendance is struggling a little bit. So if you would like a second speaker meeting, please come on down to the Solution Group. It's Tuesday nights at 7:30. It was really large before COVID. And then after COVID hit, it kind of shrunk and it's struggling to build back up. A lot of our regular home group members stuck to a Zoom meeting afterwards. So we've kind of been struggling. So if you need another speaker meeting, come on down. This week's speaker is Diana from the Noon Group, so happy to have her. When you are asked to speak, you kind of think about how did you get to where you are? And like Angela said, I've been sober 23 years, and I got sober at 18, and I have a very, very full life, a very full life. I'm happily married. I have two beautiful, healthy kids. I'm an attorney. I have my own law practice. We own the building that we're in. It looks really nice on the outside. And I will tell you, it's because I've done a ton of work on the inside and continue to do a ton of work. And I have to because I have really bad alcoholism. And it is on me constantly. And I would love to tell you all that I got sober, did the steps, and my life's been perfect, but that's not been the case for me. It's definitely been a trudge, but I've been able to do it with you guys, which definitely makes it easier. And anytime I've ever had anything difficult in my life come up, you guys have always been here. So if you take anything away from it, it's that we can do together what we can't do alone. So I was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada. I come from the big city, and my dad was recently divorced. And he moved to Las Vegas, and it was the 80s. So there was a lot of like this type of partying going on. And he met my mom, who was a cocktail waitress, and they had me. So I am the product of a lot of cocaine in the 80s. And that's very clear by the way I was the first like 5 or 6 years of my life went. My dad had two daughters from a previous marriage, but he had moved away from them, so he didn't have custody of them. And so all of a sudden he has this newborn, and I don't know if he's an alcoholic or not. He sure drinks a lot, but he definitely was like, hey, I have a daughter now. I need to clean up my act. And he actually came to AA for a while to get off his cocaine addiction. And to the best of my knowledge, he doesn't do cocaine anymore. But my mom, on the other hand, could not stop drinking when she had a daughter, and she continued to party. And it was the 80s, so she got custody of me. They were married for a very short period of time, but they didn't stay together. It was a very volatile, violent, partying type of relationship. Um, but my mom got custody of me. And it's interesting because when I was newly sober, I never really talked about my like early childhood. But the longer I've been sober, the more it's coming up. And I don't know if it's because I'm a mom and I have kids or what it is. But it actually came up this year. I have a lot of anxiety about my kids and making sure that they have food and that they're warm. And I didn't know where that came from. But my husband's like, hey, no big deal. Natural consequences. They forget their jacket one day, they'll remember it the next. That's how you parent kids, right? But I'm psycho. I will like leave work when I have something super important to run home to grab a jacket to bring it to him at school. Um, and recess is like 15 minutes. No one's freezing. It will be okay. But I get really, really obsessive about it. And after doing some work, I realized, I grew up in a home where I didn't have warm clothes and where I was cold and where I didn't have food. And so that comes up for me with my kids. I grew up in a house where um, I wasn't sure if my mom was dead or alive in the morning when I'd go to wake her up because she was so passed out from the night before. Um, I Some of my first memories are like wandering around her apartment complex alone, and my dad got custody of me when I was 5. So I had to be really, really young when this was happening. Those are some of my first memories. So I grew up in some extreme alcoholism and poverty up until the age I was 5. And my dad remarried my stepmom, who I to this day I call mom. She's adopted me, and she is fantastic. She's absolutely fantastic. But he remarried her, and she gave me the example of the woman I am today. She graduated from an Ivy League school, and she was professional. She was the first woman president of a casino in Las Vegas. Like, she's awesome. And so she raised me. But I definitely had this weird thing happen growing up where during the week I was with my dad and stepmom having this what I would call normal childhood, where I would go to school and they'd pack me a lunch and they'd help me with my homework and those sort of things. And then every other weekend I'd go visit my biological mom. And it was alcoholism and drugs and sex and violence and things that no kid should see. And then I'd go back to my normal life. And um, that's kind of a lot of like what my drinking looked like when I finally got a drink, for sure. But it definitely made for an interesting childhood. So I really needed a drink. I'm one of those alcoholics where I think I was born with alcoholism. And I definitely I've studied alcoholism quite a bit just because I think it's interesting. And, I definitely have the genetic component on every side of my family. And then I absolutely had the trauma. So between the two, like, I needed a drink real bad. And I worked hard to get a drink. Before I could get a drink, I was doing really weird things. When I was at my biological mom's house, I would like sneak her pills, not even knowing what they were, and just eat them. Like 8 years old, 9 years old. Turns out I was taking her birth control pills. Like, I didn't even know, right? Um, I would do that, and I just couldn't get to a drink fast enough. Drugs were, marijuana and stuff was easier to find when you're younger. And then I realized, my parents have like an alcohol cabinet because they host. It's Las Vegas, right? They're always hosting. Um, so I started drinking a little bit, like at parties, like my parents leftover, their friends leftover drinks and things like that, or at a wedding, they'd give me like a little taste of champagne to toast, and I would do those sort of things. But the first time I got drunk was in 6th grade, which is mortifying to me because I have a 6th grader. And to just think of him doing this right now would blow my mind. Anyway, so I was at a party and I was dancing with my friend's crush, which is also a metaphor for how the rest of my drinking went. I was always dancing with your crush because I don't care. Uh, so I was dancing with her crush, and she got really mad at me, and she came up to me and pushed me, saying like, why are you dancing with him? I like him. And she started kind of pushing me, and I just decked her in the face. And that night, there were some older kids at the party, and they'd given us alcohol. And so that's all it took for me. That's all it took for me was a fight and a little bit of alcohol, and that was awesome. right? Those two things. And I'm not big in stature, but you wouldn't know it when I drink. I, after that, uh, I got in so much trouble because my parents found out that there was alcohol at the party and that I'd punched this poor girl in her face, but I didn't care. I did not care. Um, the girl had just gotten her braces off and her teeth were loose. Like I knocked them kind of loose. And her parents were threatening to sue my parents because of it. It was a big deal. But at school, everyone was calling me Rocky. And that's how I feel when I drink. That's how I feel when I drink. It didn't matter what was going on around me. It didn't matter that I was creating chaos. I got alcohol in my body and I felt invincible and I behaved like I was invincible. I also behaved like no one else was in the room, which is kind of funny because one of my biggest character defects is that I don't want to look bad. So it's kind of funny that when I was drinking, it was like my like alternate reality set in or whatever. So I got grounded, for the rest of my life. And that was about the time, my parents started seeing some behaviors that were concerning to them. And some stuff came out about abuse and stuff when I was over at my mom's house. And so they decided it was best that I don't see my mom on the weekends anymore when I was about 12 years old. So the last time I saw my biological mom was when I was 12. And she was so far gone in her alcoholism that she didn't fight, which for a long time, I really thought that was abandonment. And now I see it as a gift because I've had a pretty good life and she didn't have the skills. So sometimes the best thing a parent can do is to relinquish custody. And that's what she had to do because of her alcoholism. So from 12 until 18, I was off to the races with my drinking. Because I was 12, it was hard to find alcohol. It's not like you can just walk into a bar. So I did a lot of sneaking. I was very sneaky and I would fill up a water bottle full of vodka and I would go to school and drink at school. My parents, because they worked in the casino industry, they were gone a lot at night and my grandma lived with us. So I could drink all day and then they'd be at work at night. And so kind of when I was like coming down or like when I'd get off from school, I'd still be drunk, but it would be my grandma. So she wouldn't notice as much as my parents would have. So I really took that pretty far. Um, I had alcohol poisoning. I would really embarrass myself at school. I got drunk one time at school and threw up all over myself in math class and just sort of like cleaned it out of my hair and went to my next class. Like it was no big deal. Um, I, I would mess around with boys, dance with your boyfriend, that sort of thing. I would do all of that kind of stuff. And I didn't care about the consequences because I was drinking. But what would happen for me is I would sober up the next morning or that night or whatever would happen and realize what I had done because I was a blackout drinker from the start. I would just chug alcohol. And I'm small now, but I was even smaller in high school. I was probably like 110 pounds or whatever. So I would get drunk pretty quickly. And just kind of coming to repeatedly being told the things I had done and by all of my peers at school. Like, oh man, you were so drunk, you did this. And this guy found your underwear in the cafeteria. Things were like, oh, okay. And just really having no clue. And having those bits and pieces come back, um, it was really embarrassing. It was really embarrassing. And so what do I do with that? I have no tools. So what do I do with that? I just get drunk again and get drunk again and get drunk again. And I had no skills on how to process life. You know, being a teenager is hard, and the way I got through it was to drink. But you know what? I was very quickly not doing well in school because it turns out it's really hard to like take tests when you're drunk. And my parents, I was at private schools. My parents, they were not wealthy, but they worked their asses off to send me to a really good private school because they were so concerned about me being in big groups because they knew I'd had some troubles in my early childhood. So they were like, we need to have her like in a more controlled environment. So they used all of their money to send me to these really elite private schools. And I was smart and I was getting D's and F's. And so they were kind of like, is she just not as smart as we thought she was? Or like, what's going on? Um, well, they soon found out. I kind of had a situation where I got too drunk one time and I slept with someone else's boyfriend, and everyone told on me because everyone was pissed. It's like I pissed off everyone. And so they called my parents and told my parents what, you know, the jig was up. And the school found out about it, and the school called. It was a Catholic school, and they were like, we don't agree with this type of behavior. And they kicked me out. Um, so I got in a lot of trouble. And I thought my life was over and I tried to kill myself. I was unsuccessful because I was drunk. So sometimes our alcoholism saves us. Um, and my parents just had no clue what to do with me. They had done everything they could to try and, you know, be good parents to me. And they'd really done a good job. When I look back at my childhood, um, for the most part, that's what I remember is this amazing life they gave me. They took me to Disneyland. I was in soccer. I did all the things that, like I do with my kids. They were strict. They always knew whose house I was going over to. They would call the parents at the other house and say, Nicole's supposed to be spending the night tonight. Is that accurate? All those things. They did all of that. And I was still able to run amok. Um, so they didn't know what to do with me. And my dad was really afraid to turn me into a psych ward because he didn't want me labeled as anything. And it was, the 90s and stuff. So there were some concerns about it. I don't think they were as forgiving then as they are now with mental health stuff. So they sent me to a rehab facility, and it wasn't covered by insurance. So it was just a ton of money. And I was there for, gosh, I don't know, 90 days or something. And I was locked up with a bunch of some alcoholics, some drug addicts, and then some kids where they were young and they didn't know what to do with them. There was one kid there who held a school hostage, but he was like 14, so they didn't know what to do with him. So they had him like at this rehab facility until he turned 18 and could go to prison for holding a school hostage. I made him my boyfriend because, it's like I always want more. I always want more. I just want to not feel. I want to not feel. I want to be numb all the time. So I went to that rehab, and they make you do the steps and do all those sort of things. And I actually really enjoyed rehab. I was like most popular person in rehab. I don't know. It was a blast. You got to just talk about yourself all the time. Who doesn't love that? Um, it was great. And I got out and I couldn't go back to that old school because they wouldn't allow me back. So I had to go to a new private school. And I was able to stay sober for a short period of time. Um, I was going to When I got out, my parents were too afraid. I was 15, so they were too afraid to send me to AA, like drop me off at the door with all of you guys, you know. And so my aunt and uncle at the time were in Narcotics Anonymous, so I used to go to NA, and they always got mad at me because I would talk about my drinking. They were like, and I'd say that I'm an alcoholic and you're supposed to say addict when you're in NA and things like that. So they'd be annoyed with me. But I went to NA for a couple of years when I was when I was sober when I was 15. I ended up drinking again later. But right when I first got out of rehab and I was integrating back into the world and going to school, I got a call in December, I believe, that my biological mom was in the ICU and that she was dying of alcoholism. And did I want to go see her? And I decided I didn't. My parents kind of pushed that I didn't. I don't know if I really would have been able to overrule them at the time, but I didn't go to her funeral, or excuse me, I didn't go visit her in the hospital. I did go to her funeral. And what I can say about, she died at 40, which I'm 42 now. So that's, she died of alcoholism at 40, which is, when I turned 40, my husband wanted to throw me this big party. And all I could think of was like, my mom didn't even live past this age. Like it was really surreal for me. And so on my 40th birthday, our friend Tammy that makes cupcakes and stuff, I bought a bunch of cupcakes and just delivered cupcakes to all my friends in the program. Cause that was what was really impactful for me, is that at 40 years old, I had 20 years of sobriety, and at 40 years old, my mom was dead. So, my mom, she died, and I can tell you her funeral was the most pathetic funeral I've ever been to, because when you die, when your life is all it is drinking and drugging, and you give your kid away, and you're unemployable anymore, there's not a lot of people left. And the only people who were really there for the funeral were my family for me. She didn't have anyone left. she didn't have anyone left by the time she died. And even like my inheritance, I got some like jewelry and stuff that was hers, and it was so mortifying. I had like a stone loose in my wedding ring, and I went to a jeweler one time with my mother-in-law, and I brought the jewelry that I'd like inherited from my mom to just see what it was and see if they could clean it up. It was like pretty gross. And the jeweler took one look at it and goes, "It's all fake," and kind of threw it back at me. And I was just like, oh, so my only inheritance was some, fake jewelry because she'd pawned off everything she ever owned. So that was kind of the foreshadowing when I was 15 years old, newly out of rehab. My mom's dead of alcoholism at 40. And that did keep me sober for a little bit. If I'm honest, seeing how all that went down. So I was able to stay sober through high school, going to another program. And, when you get sober, your life gets good pretty quickly. And so I ended up getting good grades my junior and senior year of high school. Met a cute guy who I'm now married to. I got into Carroll College over in Helena and decided I was going to go off to college. And in my best thinking, this is alcoholic thinking, the more about alcoholism that was read before the meeting, I was like, I could just stand up and say, yep, that's my story, and then sit down. How our drinking always gets worse, never better. You can have periods of sobriety followed always by worse relapse. That's what happened to me in college. So in college, I thought, you know what, if you had the childhood I had, if you went through the things I went through, you would certainly drink. You would drink like me. I was young. I'm probably not really an alcoholic, all those things. So when I went to college, I tried a drinking experiment. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go to parties, but not drink. That was the first experiment. That's not very fun. The second experiment is I'm going to go to parties, not drink, but I'm going to like time their drinking games. And then it was like, okay, while I'm timing their drinking games, and I'm pouring the beer for like some of the things, I'm just going to like take a little sip. Well, that experiment lasted a couple months. And I will tell you that I was only drinking beer because that was a rule, right? Like I never drank beer before because I was, like 12, 13, 14, 15 when I was drinking. So I was just drinking hard alcohol and sneaking it. So I'd never really had beer before. Beer is lame and it doesn't have very much alcohol content in it. So I was like, oh, this is totally reasonable. So if I have, first it was like one beer, I can have 2 beers, I can have 3 beers, that sort of thing. I was rationing it out. And I instantly stopped going to class, stopped calling my parents, stopped taking care of my personal grooming. I was like in sweats all the time. I wasn't showering. I wasn't sleeping, that sort of thing. And at Carroll College, they have a fall break. And when I got off the plane to see my parents, they took one look at me and my dad goes, "You're drinking again." The money train stops. And he told me if I was going to continue to drink, he wasn't paying for school anymore, that he'd spent my college tuition on rehab already. And he was done with me. And my boyfriend, who's now my husband, told me, you tell me all these stories about how when you drank, you would dance with other people's boyfriends. So like, if you're going to be drinking, I can't be with you. And so I decided to get sober myself and I tried exercise. I was like, okay, I'm just going to go to the gym all the time. So I was busy going to the gym, running on the treadmill as fast as I could, and at Carroll College. And there was this soccer player there. And as she was walking out of the gym, I was walking out of the gym, and she asked me how I liked college. And I said, it's pretty good, except for, my roommates drink and everyone drinks and I can't drink. And with the can't drink, she heard that. And she said, "Are you an alcoholic? Because I'm an alcoholic. I'm going to a meeting tonight. You want to go?" And I said, "No, thank you." And she showed up at my dorm room anyway. And I told you a little bit earlier, one of my biggest character defects is I don't want to look bad. And so I went to the meeting because this soccer player who played for Carroll College showed up at my dorm room and told me I was going to a meeting and I didn't want to look bad. So at 18 years old, I end up in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in Helena, Montana, filled with no one, the soccer player and myself, and then everyone else, at least in my perception, must have been 75 years old. Like everyone seemed so old. And it's funny because my parents are now 75 and they seem really young to me. But at the time, I was just like, these are not my people. This is not, at least when I used to go to NA, like it was still when they were smoking. And so like there were, it was kind of, NA is kind of like a little bit more of a trendier program, and so it was like a little bit more fun, a little bit more smoking. And I used to try and smoke, and I didn't know how to smoke. I never smoked before, but I would smoke in NA. And so all of a sudden in AA, you guys were you took your sobriety very seriously, and you were all old. At least that was my perception. And I just kept going to that meeting because that girl kept showing up at my dorm room and taking me. But I really didn't want to be there. And so, I always laugh when we read the third tradition about the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. I did not want to stop drinking. I came into AA not wanting to stop drinking. What I wanted was that disappointed look on my father's face to go away. That's what I wanted. That like what if that look where he would even say, like, what have I done wrong? What have I done wrong? Like, that's what I wanted to go away. I didn't want to stop drinking. That was my only solution. So, but I kept going to that meeting, and I don't know when. I don't know when it was. Also, I also thought I was sober. So this is kind of funny. When I first started going to AA, in my mind, because I hadn't gotten drunk because it was beer, I thought I was sober. So it took a little while before I realized I wasn't sober, first of all. So I think I even, it's about 90 days, I think, before I finally said, like, oh, okay, now I have 9. Because I was telling everyone I had 3 years of sobriety for a long time, even though I was drinking. Anyway, so at about 90 days, I realized, oh, okay, no, drinking means you're not sober, turns out. So so at 90 days, I realized I was sober. But I started going to those meetings, and you guys were able to penetrate, and I don't know why. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was, I think it was desperation, and I think it was willingness that happened at the exact same moment. And I really, I don't think, I'm not like woo-woo. I'm not one of those woo-woo people. But I do believe that, that sometimes there's things that happen, and it's kind of our chance. And that was really that meeting in Helena, Montana with all those old, people. For some reason they spoke to me, and it was my chance to get sober. And I heard what they had to say. And I still remember the first time I really felt like I belonged. And it was this old Native American guy talking about his DUIs and his ex-wives and all those things that I did not have any of. And, but he talked about how he was empty inside, and how alcohol was the only thing that ever made him feel better. And then when that was taken away, he didn't know what to do, but the AA had helped him replace all those things that alcohol used to give him, but without all the consequences. And he said it much differently and probably much more eloquently, but I was like, that's it. And from then on, you guys kind of had me. The hooks were in. I did things in AA that I didn't understand, that I didn't want to do, that I thought were stupid. I did them anyway. And I got a sponsor, because you guys said get a sponsor. And I really wanted, there was this really pretty woman. I really wanted her to sponsor me because she was hot. She drove like a nice car. And I asked her to sponsor me, and she said no. So then my sponsor, who's still my sponsor today, I love her to death. It's Anne. She was in Helena for a long time. She moved to Oregon a few years ago, but she went to college here. So those of you who are older probably knew her because she was sober when she was in college too. So I came to a roundup in Missoula, and I was sitting next to her, and I hadn't asked her to be my sponsor yet. She was on the short list. I was interviewing people. And I watched her walk up to someone and say, "Hi, I have an amends to make to you. Can I take you out for coffee and make amends?" And I'd heard about the steps, and we talked about them in meetings, but I'd never seen them in action. And I was like, that's pretty cool. So I asked her to be my sponsor. And she, of course, said it would be my honor and privilege. Here's what I require. And then she rattled off a list of things that were totally unnecessary, were an overcorrection, and that made no sense. Like pray on your knees every morning and night and hear the prayers I want you to say. And then go to a meeting every day. And I had so many excuses why I couldn't go to a meeting every day. I was taking 12 credits in college and I wasn't working. And she was like, you can get to a meeting every day. And I was like, I don't have a car. And she was like, great. You know how I also asked you to call 2 women a day? One of those women that you call, you can say, hey, can I get a ride to the meeting? You know, it's also Helena, so it's not very big. So it was pretty easy to walk. So she had me go to a meeting every day, pray on my knees, call 2 women a day, meet with her once a week and read in the book. And she would read to me like I was illiterate. And it really, like at first, it really pissed me off until I learned that that's like what we do. So she would read to me. And then when we'd get to a point in the book, she would tell me to do the thing that the book said. And I would do those things. And, you know, at the time, she also had me get a home group, get a service position. I opened that meeting. I opened the meeting that I was at. And so she had me doing all these things that didn't make any sense. And um, you know, I didn't really know it was an option. Honestly, you know, I know we say suggestions and stuff, but I kind of thought like in my brain, I thought maybe she'd fire me or something. I don't know what would happen. So I did the things. I did the things she told me to do. And very quickly, my life got a lot better. You know, when you actually show up to class, you learn the things that they're teaching you. When you do your homework, that helps. When you like call your parents regularly, you have a relationship with them. When you call your boyfriend regularly, you have a relationship with him. You know, these sort of things that were that that AA taught me. So, you know, the obsession to drink didn't go away from me automatically. If you're new and you're still struggling with like sometimes you really want to drink, I did too. I got a college or when I was in college, job at Applebee's and they serve alcohol there at Applebee's. And so I wasn't like working in a bar or anything, but I would have to serve drinks at Applebee's. And, you know, sometimes like beer would spill on my arm and it would like, just smelled so good. And that was hard for me. And there was one night I had a terrible night. I tripped going up some stairs carrying food and the food went everywhere and like it hit a patron and glass broke and it was horrible, ranch dressing everywhere. And I was only 18, so I couldn't drink. But man, if they would have given me a beer after work, a shift drink after work, I would have drank it that night. I absolutely would have. And so sometimes, you know, sometimes God does for us what we can't do for ourselves. And so I really did want to drink up until probably about 6 months sober, I'd say. And I remember I was sitting in my dorm room. My roommates had left to go to a party, and I felt so left out, so alone, so like I'm the weird, you know, I'm a weirdo. All these college kids are off having fun, and I'm just sitting here in my dorm room playing Bejeweled on the computer. And I called my sponsor, and she had a family, and she was like, "Hey, I'm hanging with my kids or whatever. Call Connie R from she was one of my sponsorship sisters. Call Connie." And I called Connie and she said, "Oh, hey, perfect timing. I'm headed to a meeting out of town." And she picked me up and we went to a meeting. And that was the last time I remember like really wanting to drink. We went to a meeting. And so that was 23 years ago. That was 23 years ago. And we went through the steps. I've been through the steps multiple times. I remember doing my fourth step and I actually kind of enjoyed it, getting to write down all those people and what they'd done to me, all those jerks, right? Until you get to that last column where it's like your part. And then the fifth step where you're reading it to your sponsor, man. And it's the same damn thing over and over. I use this person to make myself feel better. I use this person to make myself feel better. I'm thinking about myself all the time. I'm thinking about myself all the time. And it's like you say it over and over and over again. It got to the point where she'd go, "Honey, just," when I was doing my sex inventory, she's like, "Oh, honey, just say ditto." Like she was tired of hearing it, right? It's like, so, and that day when I went to go do my fifth step with her, my boyfriend was in town and we got in a huge fight. And who knows what it was about. We've never actually fought about anything important, but we got in a huge fight and I was slamming doors and he's like 6'2" and he's a big guy, but it didn't matter. I'm slamming doors and I'm pissed at him and I'm screaming. And I showed up to my sponsor's house and I was like, "I gotta go. I'm in a huge fight with Ryan." And she said, "Oh no, honey, this is where you need to be." And we sat down and we did my fifth step. And like I said, I'm not super woo woo. So my spiritual experience that I had was that I sat there and I realized, oh, a lot of this is me. Like, this is me. But the good news is when you realize that a lot of the chaos in your life is created by your own actions, that means you can do something about it, right? When the world is chaotic outside you and you can't do anything about it, then you have to do acceptance and all those things that are way harder to do. But when it's your behavior, that's a lot easier to fix, actually. And that's what the fifth step did for me. And I left my sponsor's house and she told me to go do something nice for my boyfriend. And I don't know, I bought him something at the store and brought it home for him. Um, and right there, my behavior changed a little bit. My behavior changed a little bit. So, you know, I did that and I made amends when we got to the part where we make amends. I wrote out, and you know, she had me do it the old-fashioned way where I had to write out the letters, and she looked at it, she edited it to take out all the parts where I was being a victim. She took all that out. Nope, nope, nope. And there were some things where I actually was the victim. And I think this is important to talk about because there were times when I actually was a victim. But my problem is I really like that victim role. Oh, it feels so good to wallow in that like innocence and self-pity and like, oh, why me, you know, all those things, right? Like the stuff from my childhood, all of that stuff. Like I was innocent. I was a child. Anything that happened to me should not have happened. But holding on to that for freaking 30 years and just living in that, you know, and just really making it my identity, um, for me, that's not okay. For me, that leads to a drink. For me, that needs to change. So I had to change that. And one of the amends I made was my biological grandma, who participated in abuse and drinking and horrible shit. She was still alive. And I hadn't talked to her since I saw her at my mother's funeral, and that was the last time I'd seen her, and she was drunk and falling all over the place. Um, but I just wrote her a little letter as part of my amends. And I said, you know, I'm in AA, I'm sober. As part of the process, I'm making amends. And I'm, I think I apologize for not like just totally dropping out of her life completely. And that was it. And I said, I will write to you once a month or something like that. And I started doing that. I started just writing to her once a month. And then I changed to a call. And I would just call. And my sponsor gave me the tools like sports and weather. You don't need to talk anything more than sports and weather with people who have, you know, harmed you, sort of thing. But she was my family. And I really wanted to know my family. You know, like I didn't know, you know, when you go to the doctor and they're like, do you have a history of breast cancer? I don't know. You know, my mom died. Like I have no idea. So I kind of wanted to know my family a little bit. And what came out of that was a very distant but loving relationship where my I saw my grandma once or twice in person before she died, and rekindled with an aunt and a cousin who was in. My people are so great. So my cousin, I got to see him right before he went into federal prison for 10 years for drug dealing. And my aunt was like, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I was like, oh, what's that? Well, he was selling heroin to a cop. Wrong place, wrong time. I was like, okay. So, and must have been a large amount for 10 years. But so I got to rekindle with that family, just very briefly. And, you know, my grandma, I went and visited her. She was in a nursing home. And when I went to go visit her, she handed me her will and she said, just so you know, you're in my will. And I was in law school at the time. And I took it back and I read it and I wasn't in the will. And that was okay. So I called my aunt and I said, hey, FYI, I'm not in the will. It's no big deal. Like, you know, I've seen my grandma twice, you know, like I don't want to be in the will or whatever. And my aunt said, no, she really wants you to have your mother's portion when she dies. And mind you, when I was with my mom, I grew up with like no food or heat or those sort of things. So I didn't know that my grandma had any assets, but it turns out she did. So when she died, my aunt gave me a third of her estate, and it paid for my college, paid for law school, and it paid for a down payment on my first house. And that was from writing a letter just telling my grandma about sports and weather. And I didn't do it for that reason. I didn't do it for that reason. So, you know, I made amends to, throughout this process, I made amends to my parents, and they are they're absolutely amazing. They're really amazing people. You know, they've made me the executor of their will. They call me with their problems. They're active grandparents to my kids. all those sort of things, because I made amends to them. And by making amends to, making amends to your parents, what does that look like? That looks like behaving better, My sponsor had to tell me, when you call your dad, you say, "Hi, how are you?" You say something, "How are you?" First of all, that's a big thing, because as alcoholics, we forget to do that. Like, we're so self-centered, right? It's all about us. So I always try, when I talk to my sponsor on the phone, I always try and ask about her, because she taught me to do that, to ask how she's doing as well. Um, so, "Hi, how are you?" Say something good that's going on in your life before you ask for money, because I was in college, right? Um, and I will tell you that I haven't asked my dad for money in a really long time, and those sort of things served me. Those sort of things served me. So I had a really good early sobriety. I graduated college. My home group was all at my college graduation. They threw me a big party. I got into law school here at the university. I went to law school, graduated law school. AA threw me a big party. I got married, a lot of alcoholics at my wedding. Had kids, all while actively going to AA. And I can tell you, with my daughter, I had a really tough labor. It's kind of I had a really tough labor, and I almost died in childbirth. And it kind of a small world. So there's this gal that I used to sponsor in AA, this young girl. She was super hip. She had like nose ring and tattoos everywhere, and she was very hip, way cooler than I was. And her mom was my nurse when I was dying. Her mom was my nurse when I was dying. And she said something like, "You saved my daughter's life. Now I'm going to save your life." And then I ended up sponsoring her for quite a few years when she ended up getting sober. So, and I think she's still sober today. I haven't talked with her in a while, but I think she's still sober today. So, um, we never really know the impact we're going to have on people and how that's going to go. But even when I was, when I was in the hospital and I was bleeding out and I thought I was going to die, and I come to in the ICU, who was in the room? People in AA. My friends in AA were in the room. And that is the community that I want. That's the community that I craved. That's what I was trying to gain so much by drinking myself into oblivion all the time. That feeling of connection that I never felt growing up, that I never felt drinking. I feel that connection now. And that hasn't gone away. And there's been times when I've let it kind of drift because of my own actions. I had a really hard time during COVID. I had a really hard time. My right at the very beginning of COVID, one of my best friends died. She just had an undiagnosed heart condition. She was on a run, had a heart attack, goes to the emergency room, and died in the emergency room pretty quickly. And she was 38 and had 3 kids, and we used to run together 3 times a week, and it was awful. It was just horrible. And it was COVID. So it wasn't like we had to have a weird funeral, like limited who could go to the funeral and that sort of thing. And I was afraid to see her kids because everyone was like social distancing and all of that. So I got really depressed, and I had a big thing happen at work. A gal that worked for me embezzled from our law firm. And it was horrible. She'd worked for us for like 10 years. And we were good friends. And so that happened at the same time. So I was very depressed. I was very, very depressed, and I wasn't getting to like in-person meetings. And I slowly started drifting away from going to any meetings at all, Zoom meetings. I just kind of had the excuse of like, I'm home with my kids. It's too hard to get to meetings, that sort of thing. But luckily, I've always sponsored people. It's always been a part of my program to be a sponsor and to have a sponsor. I've had the same sponsor since I got sober, and I still called her once a week. We have a meeting time, and I still was sponsoring gals. And the thing about being a sponsor is they call you even when you don't want them to, right? And so my sponsees would call me, and I'd work with them, and I was able to, the book talks about that. When all else fails, work with others. When all else fails, work with others. And nothing could be more true about my sobriety, because there were days when I was so depressed, I couldn't get out of bed, and the phone would ring and I would answer the phone still. And that worked. That worked. And that's one of those things that my sponsor told me that didn't make any sense to me that I did anyway. I remember when I was newly sober, I was hanging out with a guy who was in AA. Another college student started going to AA about my age, good looking. We were in all the same classes. I remember I married my boyfriend who I was dating, right? So I shouldn't have been hanging out with this young person in AA as much as I was, right? And I'm trying to behave differently, but I don't have the skills to behave differently. And so my sponsor would tell me, like, hey, when you go to dinner with someone alone of the opposite sex, who you may find a little bit attractive, that's called a date, right? Like, and I was like, no, 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 I have a boyfriend. And she was like, no, that's a date. You don't do that, right? And so I called her one time and I was like, Anne, I'm going to break up with my boyfriend and I'm going to date this other guy. And she was like, oh, there's this gal who I met at a meeting this morning and she doesn't have a car and she needs a ride to the meeting later. Will you pick her up and take her to a meeting? And I was so like, did you not hear this huge problem that I just told you? And she said, no, take her to the meeting. And then after you drop her back off, give me a call and we'll talk about your problem. And I went to the meeting and I don't remember what the topic was, but I left that meeting having this feeling of like, all right, that's probably not the right behavior to take. It's probably not right to break up with your boyfriend for another guy. That's behavior that we're trying to avoid. That's behavior that you've done your whole entire life that you don't want to do anymore, that made you drink before. And so I went to the meeting and I had already made that decision that I wasn't going to take that behavior. And I took the gal home and like forgot to call my sponsor or whatever because my problem was gone. And next time I saw her, she was like, oh, so, like, what are you going to do or whatever? And we were talking about it. And I forgot what my big problem was because when I help others, I get outside of my brain for just 2 damn minutes and I can stop that incessant chatter in my brain because that has never reasonably solved a good problem that I have ever. And so when I get outside of my head, I can solve my problems. And that doesn't seem related, right? When someone calls you with a relationship problem, taking a newcomer to a meeting doesn't seem like it will fix the problem. But it does. And it still does to this day. There have been many times in my marriage, I've been married 20, I should know how long. I've been with him like 25 years or something, but it's 17 married. And we are happily married, but we definitely have busy lives and we have fights and we have all those things that married couples have. And I will be like ready to leave, just absolutely ready to leave. And it's time to like meet a sponsee. And I can tell you that my sponsees have saved my marriage on multiple occasions. Because they'll call me and tell me about their problems. So, I can tell you that my life is very, very full. And I work hard. I love having a full life. There's nothing more I'd rather do on a Saturday than watch my son play basketball or watch my daughter do gymnastics. I've become one of those annoying people who incessantly talk about their kids and all the things that they're doing. I just absolutely love being a mom. There's nothing more than I love than being a mom. And I was really struggling a little bit ago with, my home group's on a Tuesday night. Sometimes my son like has a basketball game on a Tuesday night and it conflicts and it's like, what do I do? And my sponsor had this experience. She got sober. She's been sober almost 40 years. And when she was getting sober, the advice that her sponsor gave her was AA always comes first, which I still believe. I still believe that. But what that meant for her was she missed all her kids' activities to go to meetings. And she really regrets that. And so what she has evolved into is make AA your priority, but don't let other people know that. So what that means is I still make my kids' activities and I adjust my meeting schedules. I still make all my kids' activities and I adjust when I meet with my sponsees, but I still do those things. Sometimes not with grace. Sometimes it means getting in half a Zoom meeting and things like that, but it still is a priority. So I want to thank this meeting for asking me to speak. It has been a privilege. It's been a privilege to be sober in Missoula. I absolutely love our community. I love that we show up for each other. And, in this room, there's so many people who I know and friendly faces throughout the year, and then some new friends that I'm making. So thank you for asking me to speak. And also, I am the speaker seeker for the solution group. So if you know someone who either would be a good speaker, or if you yourself want to speak and it's been a while since you've spoken at the solution group, please hit me up. I'm trying to create the community that I crave. And the solution group it's been my home group the whole time I've moved to Missoula, and I absolutely love it, and it's dying. And so I said, I'm going to be the speaker seeker and I'm going to revive it. So I'm creating the community that I crave. So with that, thank you for having me be your speaker.